Welcome to Date Night with the Dialogue Wheel, starring Chachi Bobinks,
That was the dead name.
Tyler, and Evan.
Yes.
Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Date Night with the Dialogue Wheel. I am your humble host, Chachi Bobinks. Date Night with the Dialogue Wheel is brought to you by Audible.com, where you can go and get a free month trial, get a free audiobook, and make us all extremely happy. Tonight we've got a very special set of talkers with us and an even more special subject. Allow me to introduce to you, as always, Mr. Tyler.
Hi there.
The wonderful Evan.
Hello.
And our super D special guest, Tanya, who you may know from hashtag I Need Diverse Games.
Hello, how are you?
I am doing great, how are you?
I'm good. It is a nice spring evening in Chicago.
Oh yeah, it is, isn't it?
Yes.
Tonight we have gotten rid of all questions from our listeners, so sorry if you've submitted anything, because we are going to devote our entire block to talking about diversity in the Dragon Age games, most specifically Dragon Age Inquisition. And that's why we have Tanya with us today. She's kind of an expert on this matter.
That's a first.
What, that we have an expert, or that she's with us?
No, it's a first that we, skip straight to it and are actually focusing.
I know, right? Normally we ramble for 45 minutes, and we're like, oh yeah, topic. That's right. We're here for a reason. It's incredible. It really is.
And that's why we love us.
We all know that that's Evan's fault, though. He's the one who always goes off on his wild tangents and has a lot to say.
Meanwhile, Tyler's just in the background mumbling to himself.
Oh, you know me, I'll just agree to any old thing.
Yeah, that's true.
That's right. That's
Topic,
so funny.
Chachi, topic.
Oh, that's right. No, I'm sorry. I'm too distracted by you guys' role reversal here. It's hilarious. All right, so diversity. This is something that's come up a lot recently, especially since, as we progress through the Dragon Age series of games, the writers and other game devs have really pushed towards creating a awesome, diverse, really cool environment where we see representation for all sorts of different groups, be it racial or class or LBGT or whatever it may be. And so it's interesting that I personally feel, viewing the games here, that we've made a lot of progress, but that we might be kind of missing the mark in some areas. So what do you guys think about that? Where are we when it comes to hitting the mark with diversity in general with Dragon Age?
Well, funny you should say that, considering I just had that Offworld article on POCs in Dragon Age and the BS idea that, we need realism in our fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can do a lot better. We're doing better in terms, and I say we like I work at the studio. I think the games are doing better. I was like, wait, I don't work there. Hint, Bioware, hint.
Yeah, you're talking to the right people there.
Yeah.
I think the games are doing much better with LGBT representation. Krem is a good example.
Mm-hmm.
Dorian is a good example. But racial diversity, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want to stick to Inquisition, it's gotten much better. If we want to talk about all three games, it's been a progression.
That's very true.
So while it's getting better, it's not perfect.
And, I actually read the article that you wrote, and I think that one of the biggest problems that they still have to get over is that I don't think that the characters that kind of end up being problematic within the game would be problematic if they weren't the only representatives largely of people of color within the game. Like the things that you said about Mother Giselle and Vivienne, while they'd be problematic no matter what, would not be quite as problematic were they not pretty much the representations of people of color within the game.
Mm-hmm.
Like where it's the only people you see who are not white act in stereotypically presented ways, that's when it becomes problematic, more than it was before.
Exactly.
Yeah,
now, for anyone who has not had the chance to read that article yet, can you give us, and we'll link to it in the YouTube video, but for anyone who has not yet read the article, can you give us a quick elevator pitch for it, or A quick synopsis.
A quick synopsis is looking over how POC have been represented, or in some cases misrepresented, over the course of the 3 games. And I actually learned some things about the games that I did not know in the course of writing and researching the article. Because I had this moment of, oh my god, everyone in Kirkwall in Dragon Age 2 that has a position of power reads as white. And I played this game multiple times. Never, like, it was just one of the things of, like, it clearly I saw it. It was there. It did not click. But in researching NPCs and other characters, I was like, oh, wow. This is something I should have noticed before now. You know, with Inquisition, people have bent over backwards and done amazing mental gymnastics to defend Mother Giselle, especially. And it's like, you know, intent is one thing, but how people see the character is another. Because while the writers probably didn't intend for her to come across that way, that's how many folks read her. You know, there was one person who, that was a 1,500 word article with a lot of images, and all they took away from it was, I don't see why people hate Mother Giselle. That was it. That was all they took away from it.
Wow.
I mean, I gotta be honest, much like I'm guessing a lot of people who are in a privileged enough position that people in games already look and act like them all the time, I had not even thought of any of those things until I read that article, and then it became kind of apparent to me. It's the kind of thing where if you're willing to accept that something that you like can have issues with it, then it doesn't seem like that far of a stretch. But when it's something that you already want to kind of have because I think a lot of people are happy that they have a game that they know is made by people who are socially aware, and so they want to go ahead and defend it. But that's not the right way to, like, move forward, you know?
Right.
Like, the right way is to say, I'm really happy that you made this attempt, and then say, here's where you could have done better.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like since BioWare is so good at taking our feedback and so open to finding out, you know, what the fan base is needing and also what they need to do to really just hit the mark. I think that if we do pull the punches and we do say, oh, well, you know, it's better than nothing, we're doing them a disservice because they actively want that feedback. So, it bugs me anytime someone looks at something and goes, oh, well, could be worse. No, it could be better. We need to proactively come at it that way and say, this is a problem, here's how we fix it, and then the next game comes out and all of a sudden it's better. We've seen them progress, like in other areas, with the transgender community. We've seen a horrific, representation in Dragon Age Origins turn into a extremely accurate, pretty darn good one in Dragon Age Inquisition, and they got there by getting feedback and by having these shortfalls pointed out. So for us to say, oh, well, let's just not bring it up when it comes to any kind of racial equality, we're hurting ourselves and hurting them. So I'm glad that you're just willing to throw yourself out there and say, okay, this is what I see wrong, because guess what? They're going to do something with it. And that's incredible. You hold amazing power when it comes to making sure that these games go in the direction that they should.
I hope so.
I know. Do you feel powerful? God, you've got like the Molnar of opinions right now, so it's awesome.
Well, I would hope so. I mean, you know, full disclosure, some of the devs do follow me on Twitter. And hopefully that, you know, it was read and well received. I didn't get anyone yelling at me because I was actually, hello to Alan Schumacher, who told me about the podcast. I was telling him I was actually a little worried.
What's up, Alan?
Yes,
Woo!
Alan is awesome. I will fuss at him and go, oh my god, flail, once we're done recording. But I was telling him that I was actually legit worried about how some of the dubs might take it. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, this is your baby. Dragon Age Inquisition took a long time to make. And it's hard to get criticism on something you made. It's hard to get criticism on something you poured so much time into. But conversely, in conversations I've had with people, you know, that played the games, never played the games, you know, it's difficult for someone to see things if they just don't want to. And it's difficult to get them to see your point of view without some folks being dismissive. Because there were some dismissive comments. You know, I made the one wade into the comments and then ran away.
Yeah.
But some people are just, you know, I don't want to be dismissive of someone else's opinion, but there are a lot of folks who it's like, oh my god, you can't ever say a bad word about Bioware or any other dev studio because, you know, look at what they've done so far. And it's like, yes, they've done great things, but it can always be better.
I gotta be honest, I'm less surprised by the positive response to the criticism that you've gotten, to the criticism you've given, I should say, from the Bioware devs, just because so much of the criticism that they get these days is so
Horrible.
incredibly virulent and without any actual constructive advice that well-thought-out criticism that says, I like what you've done, but here are some places you can do better, has to be refreshing at this point.
I would think so, because, you know, I see the way that some people talk to the devs on Twitter and Tumblr, you know, and while I am one for having a meaningful but tough discussion, screaming and yelling at a dev about how dare you do X or Y really isn't going to endear you, and they're not going to listen to you. I mean, no one's going to listen to you. Someone, you know, there were people who were following me on Twitter just to argue with me about the article. It's like, no, not today, because clearly you've already made up your mind, and I'm not having that discussion. So you know, as someone who enjoys game writing and everything else, if there's been good reception, that's awesome. And, you know, I know that people are going to go, oh my god, you're just standing for the devs. But think about it, if in your job or your daily life someone comes to you with this kind of criticism, especially if it isn't followed up with here's something that didn't work, and I don't have a better suggestion. I just want to yell at you.
Exactly.
Right.
Man, that is a point I have tried to drive home every time I can, especially like when it comes to fandom positivity and what have you. Like, it's not about being silent and ignoring problems. It's about knowing how to present problems in a constructive way. Because if you come in and you're just like, oh, I hate you, you guys are so stupid and this is bad, who's going to open up their door to that? Nobody. It's like, no, you get the respect that you earn, and you get the respect that you give. So when you come up and you say, this is a problem and here's a suggestion for how you can make it better, then you've opened up a dialogue instead of, you know, throwing a brick through the window.
There's actually a really easy example that's incredibly recent as of this recording to use here, is BioWare was essentially contractually obligated to release its DLC on some platforms before others. And people started yelling at them about this. I honestly cannot tell you what you could constructively get out of yelling at a dev for a contractual obligation.
Especially when it came from probably several levels above the developers. This is a studio and money decision.
Exactly.
You know, maybe I'm showing my age, but I've been in that position of, this is over my pay grade. There's nothing I can literally do, but you're the accessible person, so you get the brunt of it.
Like, does anyone honestly think that a company that is owned by EA is making major financial decisions when it comes to things like release timing and downloadable content and what makes it to what platform when? Like,
right.
EA manages to put out some good content out of companies like BioWare, even if every now and then we have to get a Battlefield Hardline out of the deal in order for that to be a possibility. But we all have to admit that their business practices aren't always to suit consumers.
Nope.
And I don't think we can blame the individual developers that work under them for that.
Absolutely not.
Well, you're just being sensible.
We don't have room for that.
You gotta know who exactly to talk to about what issue, and you gotta make sure that you're actually talking to someone who can constructively make the changes happen. Like, if I have a problem with the writing in Inquisition for a character, or I find a line problematic, I'm not going to start yelling at Alan Schumacher about it. Because that's not his department.
No, he would respond kindly. I can assure you that much.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Or he would go, okay, well, you know, while dialogue is not my thing, I can pass that on, probably.
Exactly.
I gotta be honest, that was a bad example for me to use just because he's so incredibly helpful. But generally speaking, like, you wanna, if you need to have a conversation in a critical manner and genuinely want to improve something, you gotta make sure that you're talking to someone who can in some way help make that happen and aren't just, you know, taking time out of someone else's day to fix a problem that's, like you said, above their pay grade.
So, and you know what, it's funny, you mentioned, you know, decisions coming down from up high or what have you. I think the only financial decision that Bioware makes is if it's going to be apples or bananas in the break room that day. Have you ever seen their break room? Oh my god. That's their decision.
No,
that's
I
their
haven't.
financial
Do I
decision.
need
That whole
to?
table full of food, that's it. Anything else, EA, I'm sure.
I want to go visit the studio and say hi. They would have to kick me out probably because they'd be like, "Oh my god, all the toys."
Are you kidding me? They would let you stay forever. They would be like, just make sure you have somewhere to go home at night. Go on up every day.
I think of all the places that should kick me out, they might not. I don't know. Be like, sir, you can't touch that, but I wanna. Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, let's be honest though, a lot of game studios could probably use someone on hand at all times of the day to help make sure that things aren't incredibly problematic within their content. As long as game dev remains such a largely male and white space, like, there needs to be somebody on hand to say, yeah, that's offensive to the group of people you're trying to portray.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up, because we've seen in the past, especially right around when the game was released, and Crim was brought up, that Patrick Weeks talked about how whenever they come across a subject that they think they might, as white people, or as a male, or as a straight person, or whatever, that they may not be able to handle correctly, they have people that they can reach out to outside of the studio. And I remember seeing that, and I thought, well, it's interesting that they have to reach outside the studio. When you would think that maybe they could even, amongst whoever's already working there, put together a task force, or what have you, a think tank, a discussion group, that has diverse people in it, and they could just run ideas through them. I mean, they've got probably thousands of employees, hundreds of employees at least. So surely they've got people who are knowledgeable and opinionated in all those areas that could come together and kind of offer in-house feedback. But if they don't have that, I offer my services as a feminist. And I'm sure Tanya would be on board with me as well.
Yes, we can be their diversity consultants.
Ooh,
Hint,
yeah.
Bioware.
I'm on
like
board with
that.
that.
Hint, Bioware. Sorry, guys.
Cough, cough, nudge, nudge.
I'd be like, you can't talk to us anymore.
Ever.
Oh my god. Well, I actually threw that question out there on Twitter and said, is there such a position in studios on the writing team of, hey, we wrote a thing, is this thing okay? And everyone universally said, haha, no.
Wow.
Not haha, like, you idiot.
In that
It was
exact
like,
manner.
Really? You think? Right, like, oh yeah, that's not gonna happen, or it doesn't happen. And part of me was
No.
just like, well, not that it wouldn't happen, but more of a, why doesn't this exist? Especially in a major studio like EA and Bioware, because, gee, if you had brown people around, you could ask about this thing you want to have in the script. They could tell you, no, bad Bioware, don't do this.
Right? That's
Give
a
him
bad
slap
idea.
on the
Let's
wrist.
not do
Just
this thing.
no.
Right?
But frankly, like, one of the easiest ways to not make giant gaffes and end up misrepresenting an entire group of people, and this is something that I tried to elucidate in a word salad that I threw out when I was still nervous at the beginning of the podcast, but I'd like to take a second crack at it now that I'm a little more comfortable. And
All
know
right,
what's
round
going
two.
on.
Let's go. Let's go.
Do it now.
It's a lot easier to not make a character misrepresent an entire group when they're not one of the only representatives of their group in the entire game.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing when someone does something kind of problematic and they're one of a crowd, but when they're pretty much the only representative of an entire group of people you have within your game, and then they do something problematic, that's worse because that speaks out to a larger group if that's your entire population sample for how you're representing those people within the game. Like, it's a good thing that Krem didn't follow any sort of stereotypes and was kind of written with social justice in mind, because while I'm sure some people wanted to complain about that and wanted to say, oh, well, this character's just like a collection of social justice quotes and questions, if that had not been the case, Krem's the only trans person who we actually see in the game.
Exactly.
So, if Krem had been misrepresented in any way,
Even bad.
he would have been speaking to the entire game's opinion of trans people, essentially, because there weren't any other people who were trans that we saw within the game. I mean, there's Maveri Talanis, who's, mentioned
briefly
in passing
in
in
a
like
note?
a war table
Mhm.
mission.
Right.
But so the easiest solution to not misrepresenting entire groups of people would be to actually have them represented more in the games.
Right, and that's why I think I had such a big issue with Giselle and Vivienne, because you have Cerberus, and there's nothing about him that's earmarked as, oh, he's the Black Templar. It's just like, hey, if you recruit him and save him and he does well, he gets promoted, he gets uplifted. But there's nothing about him that marks him specifically as a black character, versus the colorism line with Vivian and Cole in the party, which I still want to throw things every time I hear that. Why was that in there? That could have been about her being a mage, not about her skin color.
Yeah.
No, I was just thinking also of Dorian, a remark he has about Cassandra being close to getting a man on the Sunburst throne, and I'm like, why was that called for? Why? That just seemed, Dorian's kind of an ass, but he's also very young and very insecure. But, like, it's a throwaway line that really has no place. And just thinking about those kind of little incidences where it's like, how did this get into the game? Did no one go, hey, that's kind of a shitty thing for this character to say and doesn't really fit the story?
Yeah. That's so true.
I could be incorrect here, but would it not have kind of been a good idea to... I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Vivian's voice actress. I think she's fantastic. But would an actual actor who was black like the character not have been a pretty good idea for one of... Actually, I think the first ever black party member in a Dragon Age game?
That would have been a great idea, because I was actually talking about that with one of my friends about how her voice, like, I look at her and the voice that comes out is not what I imagined, if that makes sense.
I completely agree. Yeah, I get that.
I feel like Angela Davis should be, or Angela Bassett should be talking for her or something.
Oh my gosh, that would have been perfect. Oh,
I would have preferred that.
Gosh.
Well, I mean, the actress that they got to play Ashley in the Mass Effect series is actually black, and didn't get to play a black character within that series at all.
Right.
So,
Right.
maybe that would have been a nice little trade-off as an apology for
There
a
you
character that at least started out Latina, but became more and more whitewashed over the events of the series until she looked pretty generically white by Mass Effect 3.
Yeah. No kidding.
So true. Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to word that question, because I'm curious about that same thing, how people feel whenever they've got a race represented and then they're played by somebody else. I think that, like, when it comes to, like, say, Josephine, right? Josephine is a race that does not exist in the world. But when you look at, Allegra, and you look at Josephine, it matches, right? But then, you look at the voice actors outside of that, and it's like, why couldn't we do that? Why couldn't we go that extra step and hire somebody who actually is the race that they're representing? That bothers me.
Antevans are Italian. They hired an Italian. Or at least someone who, was of Italian descent and spoke Italian.
Right? She makes sense.
Fluently.
But,
and
that's it. Everybody else, you're like,
they have a black character, their first black character, and they're like, well, someone who's sassy enough should count, right? That's really the only box that we need to check.
Yes,
it's like, no, that's not...
Tyler, and that's the problem, is that her goal in the game was to be the sassy one. So they're like, let's get this sassy...
That kind of bothered me.
That bothered me so much. It bothered me so much. Like, I actually gritted my teeth when you said that.
You're like, because that's what she is. She's the sassy one.
Well,
exactly, that's...
And
if she was one of, like, a couple black women who was in, like, the same general social strata and all that, still would have been kind of problematic, but that's one thing. But where she's the only woman of color we've ever seen in that sort of position, and she has to be haughty and sassy and all of those stereotypes, like, this is the first one we've ever had. Make her different and unique.
Exactly. When you look at, the white characters on the game, you have all sorts of different personality types. Because white people have all sorts of different personality types, just like every other race out there, right? So you've got, the sassy white person, you've got the quiet white person, you've got the,
Exactly.
white person.
There's enough white people to go around that it doesn't matter how you treat.
So throw
There's a
any white
surplus.
stereotype out there, and it's okay because it's watered down. It's fine. Oh gosh, see, I'm getting all frustrated and because I'm like,
Deep
I
breaths,
understand
Chachi,
what
deep
you're
breaths.
mad. But yeah,
Well, I mean, Dorian's voice actor, I believe he's Indian.
Mm-hmm.
That made me
Yes.
happy, yeah.
But one thing I noticed, and I wrote a post about it, the characters of color, even with Mother Giselle, have very light eyes. And I noticed that throughout
true.
them, like,
I hadn't noticed that.
Eye color?
Yes, so Cerberus has green eyes.
Yeah.
Mother Giselle has very light hazel brown eyes. Dorian has green-gray eyes. Josephine has like a very light greenish hazel brown.
Mm-hmm.
And Vivian has blue-gray eyes. There's
Huh.
something to mark them as other. Even though they're all characters of color, and Vivian is clearly, you can't look at her and say she's not black. But she's got blue-gray eyes. So that was just like a marker that stood out to me, because I was like, wait, nobody in this game has dark brown eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Except maybe one or two minor NPCs that you kind of see once and don't even really think about.
Yeah.
Huh.
And I think it's neat whenever you add in, because there are obviously people of color who have different color eyes, but if you had maybe one who did, because it's not necessary. That's not something that... Yeah, you don't look at that and go, you know what? We need more people who are black and have blue eyes. How about just more people who are black, Like, that's what we should be... I'm so frustrated right now.
That's okay. As a friend of mine and I...
You're like, I've been frustrated for 6 months.
Yeah. Well, as a friend of mine and I like to say the game is poorly written in that sense, because the characters of color, it's like some of them get to a trope level, like a level of trope display. That's not a good way to phrase it. They display a level of tropiness and kind of stop. Like, Dorian's a great example. His storyline, his personal story about his father trying to change him and dealing with who he is wonderful, and it's written very well. Yeah. However, when you get into talking about Tevinter and slavery, he's just kind of like, whatever. It's like, dude, you've been living in the South. You've seen this. You've seen how a real Templar could cut off your power. Especially if you were playing an Elven Inquisitor.
Mm-hmm.
You get a line about, you see me as a slave, and there's no real kind of growth where he goes, oh, wait, I've lived this way my whole life. Maybe I'm wrong. And I took a friend's Tumblr post and reblogged it on my WordPress about how Dorian's really just kind of a white guy with a tan in the way that he's represented. So there's just a lot of ways in which the representation could have been fleshed out, because while his personal story about, his orientation and dealing with his family was well handled, other parts of it weren't.
And that concludes our first ever diversity podcast. We continue talking for quite a bit after this. We've got another show worth of material that we'll be sharing with you guys in the very near future, and can't wait to get the feedback you guys have for us off of this one. Date Night with the Dialogue Wheel is sponsored by Audible.com, where you can go right now if you'd like, and get a 3-month trial, get a free audiobook, and make everyone very happy. Just go to www.audibletrial.com/The Dialogue Wheel and get signed up. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
This podcast was brought to you by thedialoguewheel.com and Patreons like you. Follow us on Twitter at DialogueWheel, on the web at thedialoguewheel.com, or in traffic if you're creepy like that. Thanks for joining us.